I'm Polly Glynn of Dight and Pearce Glynn Solicitors, and this is Julia Salaski. I'm going to be talking about the idea of setting up a charitable arm or a charity connected to a private legal aid law firm. And Julia's going to talk about her website, which is Crowd Justice, and about how that's been used to raise funds for litigation cases and advice. Before I start talking about the charitable arm, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the background of legal aid. When I first left university and I was looking for a job in the sector, at that point there were various private law firms that called themselves legal aid firms. These were firms that would take on less profitable work, which their solicitors felt was socially worthwhile. And although the solicitors working in these firms were paid far less than commercial solicitors, it was a sustainable model. The money paid by legal aid allowed for the firms to reinvest money in the firms and allowed for some profit. And that was what the sector was like. And there was this sort of legal aid firms, and that was sort of different from high street firms who also did a bit of legal aid on the side, but there was a sort of idea of legal aid firms. So it was in that environment that in 1997 I set up a firm to do social welfare law. And the idea of the firm was to do top quality legal services to clients through legal aid system in the areas of social welfare law. And that's what we were trying to do. Since then, over the years, we've merged with another firm and we've managed to persuade some of the best lawyers around, I think, to come and work with us. And we're now so big, we've even got an ethos, a formal ethos, which is to use the law to enforce the rights of disadvantaged of society, hold the state to account for its actions, challenge discrimination, and fight human rights and environmental abuses. And it sounds ridiculous and what a waste of time getting an ethos, but actually it's incredibly important because it really focuses what we do. When we make decisions about what we're going to do as a firm, we think about, does it fit in with our ethos? And that's the core of it. Now, I'm talking about myself and my firm, but we're not alone. There are loads of other legal aid firms throughout the UK who are doing the same kind of thing. And I think that these firms form a really important way of the way the law works. At best, firms like mine work with advice centres and law centres and charities and NGOs. And so although my paper and this talk will highlight the importance of the work of specialist lawyers, I can stress again and again that the work we do can only be done effectively alongside colleagues who are working in other organisations. So the problem at the moment is that since 1997, when I first set up my firm, the hourly rates paid by legal aid haven't gone up. I don't think they've gone up at all, actually. So we're paid exactly the same per hour as we were, except in controlled work when we're paid less because of fixed fees. This means that because our outgoings have gone up, the amount we pay for salaries, secretarial support, IT, telephones, everything else, and books, everything has gone up. It's no longer sustainable just to do legal aid work. It doesn't pay what we have to pay to run the firm. The hourly rate isn't enough. So what we've done is we cross-subsidise by doing work where we get inter partes costs and get paid commercial rates, and then that cross-subsidises it. When we look forward, legal aid isn't going to increase, is going to decrease, and various reforms are in the offing for civil litigation, which will mean that getting inter partes costs is going to be harder. So there's different ways of looking at how we cope with this challenge. We've continued to employ some of the best lawyers around. Although we have trainees and paralegals, most of the people we work, most of the fee earners are solicitors, most are senior solicitors. And we've chosen this model because we think that by using experienced solicitors, we get added value. We hope that the legal solutions that we come up with, other firms would miss. And we think that we take cases that other firms would not take on, and we win cases that other firms wouldn't win. And I'm not saying by saying this that we're better than anybody, and there's a load of other similar firms throughout the UK, but I do think it's really worth stressing the importance of quality expert advice and understanding that the extra cost of paying a lawyer with real expertise is worth something. Not always, it's not always worth something, and it's not always worth it for every single case, but sometimes it is. And as an industry and as a sort of group of people, we need to ensure that the best lawyers aren't forced out, and therefore the ability to take test cases, strategic litigation, and to deal with difficult issues isn't lost from the industry. So, just sort of talking briefly about different survival models adopted by other firms. People have gone into doing commercial work like Fisher Meredith have, or employing hosts of paralegals to do the work. But as I said, that's not the model that we have done. One of the other alternatives is to look at other funding coming in. And Julia's going to talk about crowdfunding in some detail. I think crowdfunding is interesting. We took one of the first cases that was crowdfunded, which was about the banknotes, and it was very interesting and successful. And crowdfunding can work where the issue affects, like really properly affects a large number of people, then crowdfunding can be really effective. It isn't effective where the issue just affects one family, however awful those family circumstances are, and it doesn't really affect it where there are sort of bigger international issues or something like that. It doesn't seem to work like that. So, but it can be useful for some cases, but it's not really the only answer. So increasingly, we've been working with NGOs and charities and using our expertise with theirs to try and increase our effectiveness, increase the sort of what we can do with the resources that we have. We're currently involved with War on Want, British Red Cross, the Roma Support Group, as well as with Cardiff Law School's Pro Bono Department. And so the idea of forming a charitable arm came out of this work and came out of approaching funders who would go, but you're for profit, you're trying to make a profit out of this. And us thinking, well, actually, let's try and make people understand what we are, where we come from, and where we want to be. So, can lawyers really have a charitable purpose? The purpose has to be, a charitable purpose is a sort of legal issue. It has to be for the public benefit. I don't think that that's a problem. You've heard me wittering on about our ethos. I don't think that it's clearly for the public benefit. And when we look at what a charitable purpose is, and that's a charitable purpose is a sort of definition in charity law about things you can do as a charity, it's pretty much, our ethos is pretty much in line with it, although when we created our ethos, it wasn't with a view to becoming a charity at all. That was the furthest thing from our mind. So when I look at the cases that we do, I can't see any of them would fall outside what would be a charitable purpose. So I think lawyers, legal aid lawyers, probably already do have a charitable purpose, and they certainly can have a charitable purpose. People cleverer than I am, I'm looking at you, Roger, have suggested that private firms setting up a charitable arm will never work. And I think that there are a number of difficulties with this. I think before approaching the issues, it's really important to understand what you are trying to do by setting up a charitable arm and what you are not trying to do. What you're not trying to do is to generate work for your firm, increase your profitability, protect your pension. What you're not trying to do really is to safeguard the existence of your firm. That's not what you're doing when you're setting up a charitable arm. What you are trying to do is to use the wealth of experience and expertise that the legal aid system has built up and you've built up in your firm with collecting together a group of great lawyers. You're trying to use that expertise to continue to do socially useful law. And that is a big shift. But if you can get that shift and if you can get everybody in your firm to understand that shift, then I think the rest of the progress towards having a charity or charitable arm or whatever format you want to put it in becomes easier. And I think that the issues that are potentially difficult become solvable and they kind of melt away. That's not to say that there aren't issues, and I'm just going to go through them now. So the first issue is conflicts of interest. So for example, with cross-referral, so you get a case referred to your charity, your charitable arm, and what do you do with it? The charitable arm can't take it. Where does it get referred to? So you've got to be careful. You've got to think, well, the charitable arm isn't there to help the firm, so you can't just refer it to the firm. It's got to be referred, that person would have to be referred to a number of different firms. Well, that's fine. That's not a problem as long as you realise why you're doing it. The logistics of paying salaries, if you have lawyers doing part of the work charitable, part of the work non-charitable, apparently I'm advised by lawyers that this is not complicated. You can get an employment contract that the charity and the firm could employ somebody jointly. What's more complicated is resource sharing, and about how you then calculate the cost per hour of the work that you do. So if a solicitor is doing an hour's work for the charity, how do you cost that? And how does the charity pay for the admin support and the share of the rent and everything like that? And that's complicated. I think my view is, if you again go back to the principles of you're not trying to help your firm, you're not trying to get profit, then you would just go through and work out a proper, transparent cost of time calculation for the different fee earners, taking into account the cost of the admin and the rent and everything else. I'm advised that we would need to go and speak to the Charity Commission about that to make sure that they were okay with it, and that might be complicated. They may have issues with it. My view is that the Charity Commission will be convinced, if you're convinced, and if you can get them to be as convinced as you are, that this isn't about protecting your firm, then I can't see why the Charity Commission would have a problem with it. It's clearly good for the charity to be helped in this way by the firm, and the charity is going to gain from the firm, it's going to gain from the expertise, it's going to gain from all the intellectual property that the firm has, and it's going to gain from the firm's reputation. The second issue is the control and payment of trustees. Now that can be a huge issue. Basically, trustees of charities don't usually get paid, and it's a problem if they can get paid. You can do it. You can wing it past the Charity Commission, and they agree in certain situations. My view is that so the issue is if you're going to be a trustee of the charity, so if you're going to set up a charity, so if I was going to set up a charity and I decided I wanted to be a trustee, then I would still want to get paid because I'm still doing my job, so I'd still want to get paid. But then I would be paid partly by the charity, and that would be a problem. Or I'd be paid by the firm connected to the charity, and that's potentially conflict of interest-y. So my view is again, you just don't be a trustee of the charity. You get voluntary trustees, they're the trustees, and that's what you do. And again, it's going back, you just have to think, this isn't about the firm, this isn't about me, this is about providing socially useful law as we go forward, and that's what it is. So again, that isn't a problem, provided that you're not thinking, oh, I want to just carry on running the firm but call it a charity. That's not what you want to do. The charity has to have an exclusively charitable purpose. You can't shove other things in, like supporting the work of the firm or supporting employees of the firm or something like that. You just have to be completely clear about that. With the charitable purpose, I think that is your last chance to have any control over the charity. And so it's really important to get the charitable purpose right. For me, it would be very frustrating if I helped set up a charity to do this kind of work and the charity went off and did work I thought was a complete and utter waste of time. I would find that very annoying, that all the time I had spent in trying to set it up was a waste of time. So I think if you can get the charitable purpose right, then the strategy of the charity, you have no control over that. But the purpose of the charity you do, and you must get that right. Then not-for-profit, that's the next issue. I don't think that that's a problem. The firms at the moment is, I don't think the relinquishment of profit for legal aid firms is going to be a big issue. Maybe there are firms where that would be a huge issue, but I think those firms won't be thinking along the same lines. I think what is a challenge is to keep the good things about being a for-profit organisation at the same time as getting the good things about being a charity. So I haven't had a lot of contact. I mean, I've had a contact, but I haven't been worked in not-for-profit organisations. I was once involved in a law centre on the management committee, and that was a long time ago. And at that time, law centres and not-for-profit organisations were very, very different model, very different way of working, much more relaxed, possibly. Things have really changed, and I think the not-for-profit sector and the legal aid firms are working much more in a much, much more similar way. But I think what you would want to do if you set up a charity is to get the best of both models, and to keep that full profit incentive and the sort of the pressure, and not, do you know what I mean, not lose all of that, because I think that that's what you can gain, what the charity can be good at, is to be that sort of efficient organisation. The fifth thing is regulation. If you're a charity, obviously you've got to be regulated by the Charity Commission, so that's that. Other constraints, I don't think there are any particular other constraints. I was a bit concerned about political campaigning, but apparently if the political campaigning is in accordance with your charitable purpose, then that's fine. So you can be as political as you want, provided it is in support of your charitable purpose. So again, get the charitable purpose right. Advantages of being a charity. Well, there's a level of confidence from the funders and the public, and then that's going back to my issue about the importance of and the value of experienced solicitors. Hopefully when funders understand that the money that they are paying for the solicitors isn't going into profit, they will understand that that's what they're paying for. They're paying for the experience of the solicitors. Direct fundraising would be possible, so crowdfunding, you could just do it directly, like LAPG have done for their thing this afternoon, but you could have a thing on your website, directly donate. I can't imagine that will produce a ton of money, but you know, that's a possibility. Any donations obviously would have tax deducted. The charitable firm wouldn't have to be regulated by the SRA, apparently, due to this weird exemption. So that might be an advantage, although I'm not entirely sure. I would have thought you'd probably run it in exactly the same way anyway. Fourth, tax reduction. You don't pay tax on profit if you're a charity. Currently, we're a company, so we pay 20% tax on profit. So, and that includes the increase of the work in progress. So that's money that we don't have, and we're already paying tax on it. We wouldn't have to pay business rates if we were completely a charity, and that's in our London offices, that's £41,000 a year. That's quite a lot of legal advice you can get for £41,000 a year. And the last advantage, and this is the incentive really to do it, is to look at getting major donor fundraising. And the idea there, I suppose, is that as legal aid slowly withdraws, there's going to be a gap there, and that the major donor funders hopefully will fill that gap. And I know that's maybe it's not a great thing to say, because that I don't want to feed into the idea that, okay, we can just shut down legal aid because funders will replace it. Obviously, they won't replace it in the same way and to the same extent. But hopefully there will be some funding. So, for example, in the summer when if the residence test comes in again and there are a whole lot of people who can't get legal aid, hopefully funders will step in and fund projects to enable migrants to get access. So it's that kind of thing. So now I just want to talk about the different structures of a charity that there could be. There seems to be, I've been advised there are sort of three options of ways you could do this. You could set up a charity which doesn't do any legal aid work, doesn't do any legal work itself, but then funds the law firm to do the legal work. So then that would be option one. Option two is to set up a sort of sister firm, which is a charity, and work alongside. And option three is to convert the whole firm into a charity. So just the first option is the idea of the charity subcontracting the work to the law firm. It's very simple. It would be very simple to set up. It would be purely a grant-making charity. It would be very cheap to administer. I think I'm no funder and I'm no funder expert, but I think there would be a difficulty there in that funders might say, well, why are we funding a charity that then funds a private firm of solicitors? You know, people, the funders might just go, well, hang on a second, we don't want to fund the private firm of solicitors, we don't want to fund people who are for profit. So paying the money through a charity doesn't really get us anywhere. And I could have some sympathy for that kind of view. When one of the projects that we're working on at the moment is with the British Red Cross, where the British Red Cross have bid for funds from the big lottery and are then subcontracting the work to us, so basically employing us to do the work. And it seems to me that that's a sort of, I put it as option 1A. I think that that's a sort of easier way of doing it, because that means that you could bid for funds but using an existing charity, and then you could subcontract. And so that's kind of what's happening already, and I don't see the advantage of setting up a separate charity just to do that. So option 2 is to set up a charitable arm, and the charitable arm would work in the same building using the same staff, the same resources, and then the idea, the dream would be that the client would come into the firm, and then you would be able to say, oh, well, your case could be helped by the charity, or your case could be helped by the firm, and they would be directed to which funding was most appropriate for that particular client. The charitable arm could undertake litigation, and if successful, then the inter partes costs could be awarded and build up the funds of the charity themselves. The model is complicated. The Charity Commission is likely to be suspicious about motivations. That's going to lead to greater setup costs. As I've discussed earlier, I think that the best way of working it would be the trustees to be completely separate from the charity. You'd need to make sure that payments made to staff would need to be justified as being in the charity's interests, to make sure that profit wasn't withdrawn. So you couldn't kind of go, oh, I tell you what, we're going to pay everybody a £20,000 bonus because we had a really good year in the charity, because that's profit sharing. You know, that's not going to work. So you have to be sort of careful about that and make sure that it's all kosher and above board and sensible. But again, going back to my original point, you know why you're in the business of running a charity, and that is to provide proper legal advice to people and not to do anything else. And so once you do that, then all those decisions become easier. The third option is the sort of nuclear option, which is to convert the entire firm into a charity. Once you've done it, once it's done, it's got the element of simplicity. There's no conflicts between the firm and the charity. You can get all your business rates back, all the profits, no tax. It's all sort of very nice. I think it's slightly complicated when you're doing it, because so my firm has an enormous amount of work in progress that we haven't got paid for. So if we stopped and value the firm and then set up a charity, then we would have to loan all that money to the charity. And so then you have a charity being set up which already has debts of, you know, hundreds of thousands of pounds. So that's potentially problematic, I think. So it's sort of, there would be complications about setting it up, but I'm sure there would be a way around it. My bigger concern about setting up a project like that would be that if you did it and the funders went, you know what, we're really not interested, you know, then you've kind of done this huge thing that's cost you a lot of money, and at the end of the day you haven't really got anywhere, but you can't go back and be a private firm. Once you've become a charity, obviously you can't then take a step back. And I think that would be, for me, it would just be a bit of a step into the unknown. And that's why I would favour option 2, where you can kind of dip your toe into it without jumping in completely. So, in conclusion, I really believe that it's important for all of us in the sector to make sure that as we go forward over the next 10 years, the expertise of solicitors that has been built up through years of legal aid funding isn't lost, and that we don't end up with firms similar to mine doing mostly commercial work with a bit of good stuff on the side. I think that would be a tremendous waste of the resource that is a group of people who are incredibly well trained and incredibly good at their jobs, and form an important part of, as important part of the rule of law as advice agencies and law centres and NGOs and charities. I think it's a real opportunity to innovate and to think about working in a slightly different way. I think the project that I'm doing with the British Red Cross, I find tremendously exciting. It's a sort of looking at how you can provide legal services in a better way than we have been able to do up to now under the legal aid scheme. And I think there's a real opportunity there to get the innovation and the commitment of legal aid solicitors and use that to create something that could be really good and really exciting. And I think that we just have to be enthusiastic about that. I've said what my views are about how it could work, but really it's dependent on the major funders and the Charity Commission in accepting the concept and going with it. And if they don't, then it's all a bit of it's not really going to work. So watch this space, I guess. Thank you. Julia's going to talk about crowdfunding.
Great, thanks very much. I see my slides haven't printed very well in the booklet, so I don't know if they'll be on the slideshow, but I'll try and be quite brief. And if you have questions at the end, very, very happy to answer them. But as Polly said, I run Crowd Justice, which is a new organization, and it looks like we've got text on there, so that's good. How do I put it into slide mode? How do I? While she's doing that, so we launched in May of last year. We've crowdfunded for over £250,000 worth of legal costs and expenses for people. And I'm going to go through briefly. I assume most people know what crowdfunding is, but while we're getting up on the screen, I'll just mention, the best way to think about crowdfunding, whether it's crowdfunding for the Legal Aid Awards or an arts project on Kickstarter or a legal case on Crowd Justice, it's like a virtual whip round. So if you can imagine in your neighborhood, pub or whatever, if you had a problem and you're having a drink with your friends and you might say, this is an issue that really affects me and I'm going to court. In the past, as any of you who are doing frontline work have probably seen, that's not unusual. What crowdfunding does is it enables it to be efficient. It enables you to reach a broader range of people. And so what we found that it's done since we launched, and we've had about 33 cases or 35 cases on the platform. But in addition to helping people access funds, it helps communities A, understand the law a little bit better, and B, it gives them a voice. So that can sound like a sort of a trite thing to say, but I'll give some examples of cases we've had later. And it's the type of thing where if someone you know, or if an organization you know, or even if it's an individual who's bringing a case and you just care about that individual, it's a way to help somebody in a very concrete way. And I guess we can, one of the sort of reasons behind launching this was really, from my perspective, the rise of petition sites. And this idea that there are loads of people out there who want to help with something, who want to make change happen, and that there's not really like a lot of opportunities to do that. So basically, crowd justice, I think it can be useful just to explain a little bit where we're coming from. But at the end of the day, it's using technology to increase access to justice. And there's two aspects to that, and I sort of mentioned that. One is increasing access to funding, and the second is increasing access via participation. So I don't know if you can read on the big screen, but one of the cases that we crowdfunded was actually an intervention to the Supreme Court. Many of you will have heard of the joint enterprise judgment that was handed down last week or the week before, and the interveners crowdfunded, and the woman who heads the campaign group said on the radio, it's a really great platform, not just for raising funds, but for raising awareness. And that was because for their issue, the crowdfunding enabled them to reach different audiences. So some examples in addition to the joint enterprise case that I think I've got up there. We've had inquests, we've had a whistleblowing case that really took off. Polly mentioned, and I'll get to it in a second, when crowdfunding works and when it doesn't work. But in fact, I would sort of contradict one of the things she said, which is it does work very well for groups of affected people, but it also really works well for individuals if that individual is motivated. So obviously for very, very vulnerable clients, it can be tricky. But for people who are just this whistleblowing case we had, it's a junior doctor. He's like not at all tech savvy, but he basically has this issue and he's super passionate about it. And it's about whistleblowing protections. I didn't really understand the case when he explained it to me. He suddenly has got some press coverage around it, and suddenly all of his friends are saying to him, now I understand what your case is about. But you know, if you have a motivated individual, it's really something that is more akin to a whip round than to a petition. But you have the whole spectrum with crowdfunding. So loads of people ask how it works in practice, and it's basically really straightforward. You submit some details online. You as the lawyer are really, we suggest if possible that you as the lawyer are not really involved at all. Funds raised go to the lawyer's client account with us, but the actual motivation behind the crowdfunding and the success of it will come from the claimant. So again, if you have like a super vulnerable claimant, which obviously a lot of people who really need access the most are obviously very vulnerable, it might not work quite as well in those situations. For situations where you have people who are, for example, locked up in a foreign prison, can work less well unless they have family who are really willing to drive it forward for them. But basically they write their page, and it's basically it's sort of a marketing document rather than a legal document. And the really powerful thing about that is that it helps them write down what their case is about to an audience, but it also helps their friends, family, and other people just of the general public who manage to come across it. And I'll explain how that works in a second. A little bit about the law, like why are people using the law? I didn't realize that you could use the law. You know, we had a case that I'll mention recently about trees being cut down in Sheffield. And it suddenly went massively viral in Sheffield. The people, again, they hadn't used social media very effectively in their normal lives. But ultimately, this is something that people suddenly thought, oh, I didn't know that was a legal issue. And, suddenly we're having all these people writing to us about trees being cut down, which is really cool. It's sort of opening people's eyes to the fact of what can law be used to do. So basically, they do their page. We give them some tools and some strategies as to how to promote that into the broader public. And they can keep their donors, and this is really important, up to date with what's happening in the case. So they can say, listen, we've done this crowdfunding now, and we've got, for the trees case, I have a snapshot of it later on because it's so cool. Right after they crowdfunded, they got an injunction against the trees being cut down. So, they're totally exuberant. They're writing to all of their donors, and people are, by default in our system, donors are anonymous, and that's for a number of reasons, but they can email them through the platform. So that's really important too, because it means people keep coming back to the platform. So if you funded one tree case, you might fund another tree case, and so on. So I've sort of mentioned this. When does it work best? The really key thing is that the person raising is passionate about their case. So we often have lawyers coming to us and saying, my client really needs funds for this case, but the client themselves might not understand the funding needs of the case or what's happening. And in that case, it doesn't work so well. But when the client, or if it is a client who doesn't use social media or whatever, then it can be someone in their network who helps them do it, and that works well. We have a case coming up soon with a protected client, and so it's one of their friends who's actually going to run the crowdfunding for them. I'll mention that a little bit more around the detail of that in a second, but basically, we also have a lot of cases that come to us and they say, we need funds straight away, we're going to launch tomorrow. And that can work. Often it works better if there's a few days to spread the word in advance and to warm people up. And a community or network can be motivated to support the case. And I think that's one of the big fallacies of crowdfunding in general, whether it's for a generic like fundraising campaign or arts project or whatever, is that you put it up there and like random strangers come pouring in. With any crowdfunding, the vast majority of initial supporters are going to be people in the network of the person raising. And so that's why it can be important, that person's a bit motivated, and that person doesn't have to be rich, and their immediate network doesn't have to be rich at all. £1 is totally sufficient, and it also gives the person who gives £1 the ability to feel connected to that case and like they've helped in some way. But what people often forget is that everybody and maybe not everybody, but most people have a network, even if it's just a family nearby them, even if it's a family and friends. Most people can raise, we've had people raising funds from like a 19-year-old woman who had immigrated to the UK and was going to be kicked out soon, to a Colombian cleaner who was treated very badly by her cleaning company, to some wealthy landlords. We've had a really big spectrum of people raising funds successfully through their networks, big and small amounts. This is kind of a complicated slide, but it's basically just to show sort of how it works in terms of how do you promote a case. And this is the sort of, we don't give this slide to people raising, but we really explain to them, all of this is about whether, you know, whatever the case, getting people aware of it, because there's two aspects to crowdfunding, and one is people know about it, and the second is once they know about it, they give. So getting people aware of it is mostly like really common sense kind of methodologies, emailing people, putting it on Facebook if they're on Facebook, if it's a local issue, putting flyers up. It's really pretty straightforward. It's the same, for example, for a petition site, but this is why the person and not the lawyer has to be motivated to spread the word. I mean, one thing that I don't know if you noticed, but when Fiona was mentioning the crowdfunding that they're doing, you know, mentioning other important people who are giving funds, mentioning a lot of this is about social pressure and social excitement. So, you know, oh, so-and-so gave, I gave to this case. A lot of it, if you say on Twitter, I gave to this case, could you also give to it? It creates a kind of cycle that's really powerful. We're doing something really special, and we're doing crowdfunding for legal. And there's a lot, we get totally different reactions to people across the spectrum when we tell them about what we're doing. But I mean, some of the basic things that crowdfunding for legal allows you to do, as I mentioned, is really engage communities and demystify the law a little bit. And what we're doing that's a bit different is, for example, funds raised, I mentioned, go directly to the solicitor's client account or the barrister's direct access account. That serves a twofold purpose. One is that the claimant themselves is not responsible for all the anti-money laundering checks. We do all of that for them. But the second key thing is that backers know that this is a real legal case. So we're not saying, is this a good case? Is this a bad case? Do we think it has merit? Do we think, you know, it's a case that deserves to be funded? We're saying, if a lawyer is willing to be instructed in that case, then it passes our threshold of, is it a real case? It's a donation-based platform, so to the extent that it's a bit technical, but obviously in litigation, if you are giving on an investment basis, there can be adverse cost consequences. So we're trying to do everything in a way that really protects donors, that protects case owners, that provides a very clear mechanism for transfer of funds, and that also does, it complies with solicitors' client money rules. We do sanctions and PEPs checks on donors. We do KYC checks on case owners, claimants, what we call case owners, the person who's instructed the lawyer. But fundamentally, this is kind of technical stuff around making this a safe site. And the way that we see the big benefits to this is that we're building up really a base of people who care about law, who care about social justice issues and legal issues. I think actually I've mentioned all three of these cases, but they're all ones that we've had really recently on the platform. Dr. Chris Day, who brought a whistleblowing case. Apparently junior doctors don't have, there's a very strange lacuna in the law where they don't have whistleblowing protection, and that was an intentional decision by Parliament. So he's challenging that through the Employment Tribunal, but it's allowed, I think he's had 30,000 junior doctors visit his page, and they're all completely head up. They didn't even know they didn't have whistleblowing protection before. Joint enterprise case, that's a really big, you know, that's a really powerful reversal of 30 years of case law. It's a big deal. And this, I just love this email they sent out in this Sheffield case about their trees. I don't know if I can read it here, but it says, like, we're sure the groundswell of support in the crowdfunding played a role. And, you know, whether it did or not, it obviously made people in the community feel like they were doing something. And happily, in that case, they got an injunction. Obviously, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. I put a sort of picture up here. We have just a page, Polly's pictures on it, to sort of answer any questions, or it sort of recaps, I guess, what I've said, but basically to explain from a lawyer's perspective how it works. But it's not so complicated. And if you have questions, also please feel free to email me. It's julia@crowdjustice.co.uk. And yeah, any questions for either of us would be welcome now.